Have you ever looked in the mirror and seen your mother's eyes looking back at you? Or maybe you have your dad's sense of humor? It's all part of this incredible puzzle we call heredity. And today, we're going to follow the clues, all the way from simple farm fields to the complex game of chance that shapes every single living thing. You know, our story here doesn't start in a high-tech lab with microscopes and DNA sequencers. Nope. It starts somewhere much more down to earth, the farm. For thousands of years, humans have been quietly, and maybe without even realizing it, shaping the world around them. I mean, just think about it for a second. How on earth do you get a tiny little dachshund from a giant, majestic wolf? Or how about this? Broccoli, kale, cauliflower, all of these completely different vegetables actually come from a single, humble, wild mustard plant. It sounds crazy, right? But it's totally possible, and it's the result of a very deliberate process. And that process has a name: selective breeding. It's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Humans pick the traits they like, the friendliest wolf, the leafiest mustard plant, and then they only let the organisms with those traits reproduce. In a way, it's like we've been playing Mother Nature for centuries. Now, the key thing to get here is that this isn't about creating brand new traits out of thin air. Not at all. It's about working with the variation that's already there. So if you want bigger apples, you find the tree that naturally grows slightly bigger apples, you plant its seeds, and you just keep repeating that, generation after generation. Over time, that trait becomes way more common. So selective breeding tells us what people were doing, but it doesn't really explain how it works under the hood. For that piece of the puzzle, we have to travel back to the 19th century and visit a quiet monastery garden and meet the man who would become the father of genetics. And this is the guy, Gregor Mendel. He was a monk with a serious passion for science. And by meticulously breeding and tracking thousands upon thousands of pea plants, he noticed something incredible. He saw that traits like flower color or seed shape weren't just blending together randomly. No, they were being passed down according to clear, predictable, mathematical rules. Okay, so to really get what Mendel figured out, we need to get on the same page with some key terms. Let's start with the absolute foundation, the gene. You can think of a gene as a single instruction, or maybe like a single recipe in the giant cookbook of your DNA. It's the basic unit that codes for one specific trait, like, say, having freckles. But here's the thing. For any one gene, there can be different versions. We call these different versions alleles. So, for the pea plant gene for flower color, there's a purple allele and a white allele. And here's the important part. For every gene, you get one allele from each of your parents. You're a mix of both. But it's not always a 50-50 split in terms of what you see. Some alleles are, well, they're bossy. We call them dominant, and we write them with a capital letter. If you have even one copy of a dominant allele, that's the trait you're going to see. Then you have recessive alleles, the lowercase letters. They're a bit shy. The only way a recessive trait shows up is if you get two copies of it, one from each parent. And this leads us to a really important distinction. The genotype is your actual genetic code. It's the combination of alleles you have on the inside, like big P, little p. The phenotype, on the other hand, is the physical trait that you actually see on the outside, the purple flowers. So just remember, genotype is the code, phenotype is the result. What Mendel figured out was that passing on these alleles is basically a game of chance. And to predict the outcome of that game, he turned to a tool that we all use without even thinking about it: probability. So let's take a quick break from genetics and think about something simpler. Imagine you flip a coin. Then you flip it again. What are the odds, what's the probability that you get heads both times? Well, we can just map out all the possibilities, right? You could get heads heads, heads tails, tails tails, or tails heads. That's it. Those are the only four options. So the chance of getting heads heads is just one out of those four possibilities, or a 25% chance. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so what in the world does flipping a coin have to do with pea plants and flower color? Well, as it turns out, pretty much everything. This is where it all clicks into place. This little grid is called a Punnett square, and it's basically a probability calculator for genetics. You just put the two alleles from one parent across the top, the two from the other parent down the side, and you fill in the boxes. Each of those four boxes shows you a possible outcome for their offspring. And just like with the coin flip, each box represents a 25% chance. Now, Mendel's rules about dominant and recessive traits are an amazing start. They're the foundation of genetics. But as scientists kept digging, they started to realize that sometimes the rules of inheritance can get a whole lot more complicated. Yeah, Those simple, clean patterns that Mendel saw in his peas? That's what we now call Mendelian genetics. But in the real world, a ton of traits follow what we call non-Mendelian patterns. And that's where the rules of dominance can get bent, or sometimes just thrown right out the window. Check out this awesome example in horses. On the left, you've got incomplete dominance. That's where the alleles sort of blend together. So a black horse and a white horse have a gray foal. But on the right, that's codominance. Here, both alleles show up fully at the same time. So a black and a white horse make a horse with black and white spots. See the difference? Blend versus both. And what about traits that aren't just one thing or another? I mean, think about human height. People aren't just tall or short, right? There's a whole range in between. These are called polygenetic traits, and it means they're controlled by lots of genes all working together to create that beautiful, continuous spectrum of variation you see in things like height or skin tone or eye color. And this is a perfect example of how science is always learning. I bet a lot of you were taught this in school. I know I was. Brown eyes are dominant, blue eyes are recessive, end of story. But we now know it's a huge oversimplification. Eye color is actually a complex, polygenic trait influenced by several different genes. And that's why we see all those amazing shades of green and hazel and everything in between. Okay, here's another really cool one. If you've ever had a Labrador retriever, you might have wondered about their coats. How do you get black labs, chocolate labs, and yellow labs all in the same breed? Well, their genetics give us a perfect peek at yet another layer of complexity. This wild pattern is called epistasis. Here's how it works in labs. One gene decides if the dog's pigment will be black or brown. Simple enough. But then a totally separate gene acts like a master on-off switch. It decides if any pigment gets made at all. If that switch is in the off position, it doesn't matter what the other gene says. The dog is going to be yellow. It's like one gene has total veto power over another one. So think about the journey we've just taken. We went from ancient farmers just picking the best crops, to a monk in a garden patiently counting peas, all the way to understanding the complex genetic dance that creates all the diversity of life we see. It really makes you stop and wonder. Now that we can predict the blueprint of life, what's the next incredible puzzle we're about to solve?